What if the third eye that so many seekers speak of wasn't opened by some secret potion, but by something far quieter? A small cup, a bitter sip, a practiced touch that asked attention to wake up. The title of this piece makes a bold claim: the forgotten food that activates the third eye. I offer that claim as an invitation, not a promise. We'll follow evidence when we can, and interpret where evidence leaves gaps. If you want the rest of this exploration as a short series, subscribe now for the next episodes. In December of 1945, near the village of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a set of leather-bound codices surfaced by accident in the hands of local farmers. Inside them were texts that most of the Christian world had not read for centuries, gospels and treatises that focus less on law and institution and more on inner knowing, memory, and a direct, often poetic route back to a luminous source. Scholars call many of these writings Gnostic. That label bundles a variety of ideas: a distrust of material complacency, a hunger to remember an original condition, and a vocabulary that names a distant, ineffable one. These were not canonical scriptures. They lived at the edges. They were treasured by certain communities, sometimes called pneumatic, who lived with an emphasis on spiritual experience and interior awakening. Over time, for theological and political reasons, many of these texts were set aside by dominant institutions. What we have in Nag Hammadi is fragmentary and interpretive. It invites reconstruction rather than declaration. The cosmological picture that emerges in many of those writings is poetic and strange. Imagine a source of light so pure it cannot be framed by names. Call it the monad, the one. From that distant brightness, a movement or outflow gives rise to layers, splendors and shadows, powers that shape the visible world. At the edges of that world, a lesser craftsman, sometimes named the demiurge, fashions a material sphere. Around him are the archons, guardians, or impediments, not necessarily malevolent in the way modern words imply, but agents that complicate direct return to the source. The human predicament, in this vocabulary, is forgetfulness. We carry a spark that has lost its recollection of origin. Anamnesis, the recovery of remembering, is the central practice, not a doctrine to be learned as information, but a felt reclaiming of identity. Picture a lake whose surface reflects starlight. Anamnesis is the slow easing of disturbance until the image within returns. If the problem is forgetfulness, then the practices that matter are those which reorient attention. Among the many tools that pneumatic communities and later monastics developed, there are repeated traces of embodied cues, gestures, phrases, the placement of hands, and yes, foods and beverages ritualized not as potions of power, but as markers of threshold. The phrase forgotten food works on two levels. Literarily, it can name a class of ritual consumables: bitter decoctions, aromatic resinous smokes, simple tonic drinks, that were used to mark vigils, to stay awake, or to provide a sensory anchor during prayer. Symbolically, it can mean any sensory practice that feeds memory: breath, touch, a short phrase, or the habit of bringing attention back to a single point in the body. Over the centuries, across monastic traditions, what people drank in the night to keep vigil varied widely and rarely resembles the glamour of modern myth. Bitter infusions, robust herbal decoctions, sour tonics that sharpened the palate, and aromatic substances tended to function as threshold makers. They were not advertised as mystical keys that would guarantee visionary experiences. Rather, they were ordinary aids that helped maintain the posture of attention long enough for recollection to arise. Some inscriptions and interpretive texts hint at resinous substances used in small amounts as part of liturgical fumigation, not to induce states, but to signal a change in time and focus. All of this is tentative interpretation. Scholars reconstruct likely practices from passing references and ethnographic analogues. We must resist the leap from was used as a ritual marker to is a guaranteed activator of the third eye. When contemporary seekers say third eye, they usually mean an increased capacity for inner sight. a subtle clarity in perception, an ease of noticing the contours of one's own attention, or a felt sense of larger affinity with something beyond immediate desire. It is a shorthand, a cultural phrase with many histories. In the vocabulary of the Nag Hammadi texts, what interests those communities is not an anatomical organ, but a recovery of knowledge, a remembering that lifts the veils of ordinary distraction. For our purposes, then, activation should be heard as the opening of attention toward remembrance, a change in how one notices rather than a biological switch. Part of that embodied pathway can be mapped simply. Certain points on the body have been used across traditions as anchors for attention. 3 such somatic markers, useful for gentle checking and reflection, have appeared in interpretive readings and in contemplative practice: the base of the skull at the back of the head, the outer edge of the hand near the little finger, and the center of the sternum. These are not clinical landmarks. They are felt places, prompts for orientation. Think of them as waypoints on a pilgrimage you take within your own nervous system. The base of the skull, where neck meets head, often gathers tension and carries attention when we are anxious or distracted. In contemplative idioms, it's spoken of as an anchor. Return here to find calm. The outer edge of the hand, the side that aligns with the little finger, functions as a sensitive margin, a site of touch and a reminder of contact with the world. The center of the sternum, where breath meets heart, harbors a felt sense of intent, a place where conviction and openness can be noticed. Please understand that these are phenomenological markers, inviting exploration, not clinical tests. If you feel willing, join me in a short, gentle check of these 3 points. Sit comfortably in a chair or on the floor, with your feet supported and your spine neither rigid nor collapsed. Breathe naturally. This is an observational practice. You are a careful witness of your own present moment. Place your fingertips lightly at the base of your skull. You are not manipulating anything. Simply rest the hand there and notice what happens. You may notice warmth, tightness, nothing at all, or a subtle settling of attention. There is no correct sensation and no expectation to meet. If touching feels unpleasant or intrusive, skip it or simply gaze inward to the place with the mind. When you are ready, let your hand trace to the outer edge of the other hand, resting near the little finger. This margin of the palm is a border. It can remind us of edges in perception, the place where inside meets outside. Allow whatever sense arises to register. Perhaps you feel a small electric awareness, or a soft blankness, or simply the texture of fabric under your fingers. Naming is optional. The primary instruction is curiosity without demand. Finally, bring both hands, if you like, to the center of the sternum. You might rest one hand there, or let the palms hover. Offer yourself a brief phrase as an orienting line of attention, a modern condensation rather than an ancient chant. I remember the source. I open to presence. Repeat it silently, gently, not as a formula, but as a frame for noticing. Once more, there is no outcome to force. If nothing seems to happen, that is perfectly ordinary. If something subtle shifts, note it with simple humility. There is a softening, or I felt a flicker of attention. If discomfort arises at any point, disengage and let your hands rest in your lap. This practice is a way of collecting data about your own attentional landscape, not a test of spiritual worth. Returning to the theme of forgotten food, imagine how a small ritual cup could function in these moments. A cup placed on a table at the hour of vigil names a threshold. The act of lifting the cup, the aroma rising, the sensation of bitter warmth on the tongue, each of these is a sensory bookmark. Monks and ascetics across traditions often used simple beverages to structure time and to remind the body that one was entering a different mode. These drinks were not advertised as mystical elixirs, but as aids to establish duration. The bitter taste sharpens the appetite for wakefulness. The scent cues the mind to shift. The routine itself becomes a carrier for recollection. In that sense, the forgotten food we speak of could be as mundane as a bitter tea or as symbolic as the habit of placing a single herb at the rim of a cup before a vigil. The essential feature is ritualized attention, not pharmacology. It is important to underline what we will not endorse. I will not recommend the consumption of psychoactive or illegal substances, nor will I suggest any recipe, proportion, or technique meant to induce extraordinary states. Historical references to resins and bitter medicines are interpretive notes for scholars. They do not amount to endorsements. If you are curious about herbal traditions or have health concerns, consult a qualified healthcare provider. Ritual can be powerful precisely because it mobilizes the body and expectations. With power comes responsibility. If the beverage itself mattered historically, it mattered because it formed a bridge between posture and memory. Think of ritual food as a device that aligns three things at once: the body, the sensory event of tasting or touching; the word, a phrase or prayer that names intention; and memory, the recollective aim of anamnesis. When these elements converge, attention is more likely to stay in a single frame long enough to notice small, genuine shifts. That convergence is what some modern writers have exaggerated into promises of activation. A more cautious reading suggests that ritual food can be an affordance, a supportive context in which coherence of body, word, and memory becomes likelier. There is another practical reason to prefer metaphor over miracle. Communities are better equipped to make sense of subtle and variable experiences than isolated individuals. If you try the somatic check and notice something, a soft warmth at the chest, a fleeting clarity, the sense of a remembered posture, share it in modest terms with others. Scholars and experienced practitioners learn patterns by gathering many small reports, comparing notes, and distinguishing ordinary fluctuations from more sustained changes. If you feel called to report, do so briefly. Write the keyword recognition in the comments and add a one-line note of what you felt. Frame it as personal observation, not proof. This collective patterning helps build a field of sober testimony without collapsing into sensational claims. We should also keep the historical and doctrinal lines clear. Gnostic writings offer powerful metaphors and existential resources. They are not the same as canonical Christian teachings, nor are they a single, unified tradition. Many of the images and cosmologies I described are interpretive reconstructions offered by scholars who read the texts alongside other evidence. The value of those reconstructions lies not in their finality, but in their capacity to invite us into a different form of attention, one that prizes memory and interior fidelity. To return finally to the title. When I speak of the forgotten food that activates the third eye, I am asking us to reconsider what we mean by both food and activation. The forgotten food is often less a rare substance and more a ritual habit, a small, repeated device that tilts our attention back toward remembrance. Activation is not a sudden unlocking, but a series of soft reorientations, the easing of distraction, the arrival of a felt memory, the capacity to hold presence without immediate reaction. If you approach this idea with curiosity and caution, you may find that the simplest acts, a deliberate sip, a practiced touch, a quiet phrase, provide enough of a lens to see what was already moving just beneath. A brief practical reminder before we close: be gentle with yourself. There is no expectation to succeed. If you practice the 3-point check and nothing remarkable happens, that is both ordinary and informative. If something subtle arises, note it with gratitude and moderation. Avoid using substances without full legal and medical consideration. If you have health conditions or are taking medications, consult a healthcare professional before exploring any herbal or dietary experiment. Remember that communal discernment outperforms solitary certainty. If you tried the short somatic check and want to share what you noticed, write recognition in the comments and add a single-line description of one small sensation or observation. That simple, patterned data helps us see trends without turning individual experience into claims of universal truth. If this inquiry resonated with you, subscribe to follow the series. We'll explore the texts more closely and look at other sensory practices that communities have used to cultivate memory. I will leave you with an image. A small cup, steam curling from its rim, a single leaf brushed against the edge like a marker. Someone sets the cup down, steadies their hands, and offers a soft phrase to themselves. That small ritual, a cup, a touch, a remembered word, is not a promise of revelation, but it is a faithful way to keep returning to the source of attention. In the practice of returning, perhaps we remember a little more of who we are.